Now, I would like to introduce our moderator for Panel 1, International Laws and Norms, Dr. Matt Kroenig. Dr. Kroenig is the Vice President and Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. In this role, he manages the Scowcroft Center's nonpartisan team of more than 30 resident staff and oversees the Council's extensive network of non-resident fellows. His own research focuses on U.S. national security strategy, strategic competition with China and Russia, and strategic deterrence and weapons non-proliferation. Dr. Kroenig is currently a commissioner on the Congressional Commission for the Strategic Posture of the United States. He previously served in the Department of Defense and the intelligence community during the Bush, Obama, and Trump administrations. Dr. Kroenig is also a tenured professor of government and foreign service at Georgetown University. He holds a PhD in political science from the University of California at Berkeley. And ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Kroenig and panelists.
Well, thank you very much for that generous introduction. And wow, look at this crowd. It's nice to be here back in Omaha with my 800 closest friends. Welcome to this first panel on international law and norms. After World War II, the United States and its allies set up an international system that some have referred to as a rules-based international system. And the name isn't perfect, but what is unique about the post-World War II international system is this dense set of international institutions, laws, and norms that's unlike anything that's preceded it. And the system really depends on several major components: strong alliances in Europe and Asia, backed by American military power and its extended nuclear deterrent. A system of international institutions meant to govern the international economy: World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, meant to ratchet down trade barriers, promote free markets, promote economic development, and in the norms space, trying to promote democracy, human rights, and good governance. So the system hasn't been perfect, but I would argue that the results have been pretty remarkable. 80 years with 0 great power wars. Standards of living in the United States and around the world have increased 5 times since World War II. And we often forget after World War II there were only about 12 democracies on Earth. Now there are nearly 100. So the world is safer, richer, and freer today because of U.S. leadership behind this rules-based international system. But the system is coming under challenges. In particular, as General Cotton mentioned, these revisionist autocracies, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, increasingly working together, using various means, including military threats, to disrupt and maybe even displace this order. So how should the United States and its allies respond? Should they cling to this system in a new era? Should they discard it altogether? Or should they revitalize and adapt it for a new era? So these are some of the questions we'll address today, but we'll address other questions as well. So for example, what are the security, values, and economic features of this system? How has the system helped to deter armed conflict in the past? What is the potential impact of adversary challenges to this system upon U.S. extended deterrence, and how can these challenges be mitigated? And what measures could be taken to strengthen the rules-based system and deterrence in order to prevent war in the emerging international security environment? And then finally, how do U.S. and allies, how do the United States and its allies balance cooperation on one hand and deterrence on the other with these revisionist autocracies? So as you can see, probably the broadest panel of the symposium, we're going to essentially focus on global order. And to do that, we're blessed to have a fantastic panel. And so let me introduce them now, and you can see the full bios in your materials. We're very fortunate to have the Honorable Mallory Stewart, Assistant Secretary of State for Arms Control, Deterrence, and Stability. From the department, or recently departed from the Department of Defense, the Honorable Vipin Narang, who recently stepped down as the Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy. He's back now at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he's a professor. Next, we have Barry Pavel. Barry is the Vice President and Director at the RAND National Security Research Division. And a personal note, I was an intern for Barry in the strategy office of the Pentagon about 20 years ago, so good reminder to be nice to your bosses. You might be interacting with them at some point in the future. And then finally, Mr. Marshall Billingslea, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, and again, you can find their full panels in your materials. So the plan will be to give each of the panelists 5 to 8 minutes to make opening remarks. I might ask a question or two, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So be ready with your questions, be thinking about what you want to ask this distinguished group. So we've discussed with the moderators ahead of time, and if Dr. Narang is ready, we're going to start with him. Vipin?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. I wish I could have been there in person, but as Matt said, I just departed from OSD policy on Friday, and I'm on dad duty in Boston this week. And I want to thank General Cotton for inviting me to speak. In my personal capacity, I no longer represent the Department of Defense, but what I thought I'd do is give an overview of some of the work we've done while I was there for the last 2.5 years. And this picks up on a longer speech I recently gave at CSIS a couple of weeks ago. And if you'd like further elaboration on anything I say today, I encourage you to find those remarks, which are on the Pentagon website. So I'm going to deviate a little bit from the broad, I think the specific direction of the panel on international norms and law, and talk about sort of the eroding arms control edifice and how I think we have been thinking about how to respond in close collaboration with Mallory and her team, STRATCOM, Joint Staff, the Office of Nuclear Matters, the NSC, and so a whole interagency effort as we've approached this new and dynamic security environment that General Cotton identified. So I was honored to serve as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense and then Acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy for the past 2.5 years, which have been some of the most challenging years for U.S. nuclear policy this century. The key message I'd like to leave you with today is sobering but necessary. While the administration long sought to strike a balance between deterrence and arms control, we now find ourselves in nothing short of a new nuclear age, an unprecedented mix of multiple revisionist nuclear challengers who are uninterested in arms control or risk reduction efforts, each rapidly modernizing and expanding their nuclear arsenals and openly threatening to employ nuclear weapons to achieve their aims. These challengers' actions have forced us to shift to a more competitive approach. This more competitive approach is founded on 3 pillars. First, we must continue to field a modern nuclear deterrent with the numbers and the attributes necessary to deter strategic attack, assure our allies and partners, and meet our objectives if deterrence fails. Our current nuclear force posture and planned modernization program is necessary, but may well be insufficient in the coming years to support this need. Second, we must continue to strengthen our network of allies and partners and our extended deterrent efforts in NATO and the Indo-Pacific, because, as General Cotton said, these are our asymmetric advantage over our adversaries. And third, we must invest in building the next generation of talent, the next generation of leaders to guide our strategic thinking and shape our future infrastructure and capabilities in this era of competition, as is well represented in the auditorium today. Let me be clear, though, competition is not a foregone conclusion. If our adversaries make different choices, so can we. But so far, they have not and shown no interest in doing so. So if our adversaries continue down their current paths, the United States, alongside our allies and partners, is ready, willing, and able to confront the challenges of a new nuclear age. When I first came into my position in March 2022, the Nuclear Posture Review had just been completed. It arrived at a unique moment. The administration recognized that the world had become more dangerous and sought to restore diplomacy's proper place in national security, rebuilding and strengthening U.S. standing in the world and reinvigorating long-standing alliances and partnerships. We immediately extended the New START Treaty and put processes in place to develop a follow-on agreement. We hoped that the People's Republic of China would engage responsibly, both bilaterally and in international fora, on nuclear issues, including transparency and risk reduction, and we repeatedly raised these issues in our engagements with Beijing. But in February of 22, Russia invaded Ukraine, illegally and without provocation. Almost immediately, Russia began making irresponsible nuclear threats designed to deter and dissuade support for Ukraine. Russia recklessly brandishes nuclear weapons, particularly its growing stockpile of lower-yield, treaty-unrestricted nuclear weapons. Russia continued rattling the nuclear saber while it brutalized Ukraine's population and attacked its cities. These provocations took place under a thick cloud of misinformation and outright lies. Even while Russian diplomats in Geneva were speaking solemnly about the need to avoid nuclear threats and nuclear war, Moscow was courting nuclear risk and threatening escalation. Russia's dangerous invasion of Ukraine came after a year of intense discussion about the trajectory of another nuclear power, the People's Republic of China. In 2021, non-governmental researchers announced their discovery of hundreds of new ICBM silos under construction in Western China. Later that year, the intelligence community revealed that the PRC had accelerated its nuclear expansion, assessing that the PRC would likely field over 1,000 operational warheads by 2030. And today we assess that the PRC has likely completed silo construction and has begun loading them with missiles. And as I like to say, we can't sleep on North Korea, which also continues to expand, diversify, and improve its nuclear, ballistic missile, and non-nuclear capabilities. This emerging security environment is unprecedented. The now common phrase two-peer nuclear problem, as General Cotton noted, understates the complexity of the challenge we face. I prefer to characterize the environment as either the two-peer plus problem or the multiple nuclear challenger problem, because each adversary presents different challenges for U.S. strategists. For example, although Russia is a nuclear peer, it does not appear in any other domain or sense of the word. However, as a conventionally weaker power with revisionist regional ambitions, Russia poses an acute threat of nuclear employment and a brazen willingness to flout international norms for its own benefit. Meanwhile, the PRC is not yet a nuclear peer, but the growth in its nuclear arsenal size and diversity, accompanied by posture changes from regional employment to launch on warning, places it on a trajectory to soon become one. Unlike Russia, China will be a peer to the United States in virtually every relevant military and economic domain. Any one of the nuclear challenges we face would be daunting by itself, but the simultaneity and growing collaboration and evidence of collusion between them is unprecedented, forcing us to think in new and careful ways about challenges such as escalation management and deterring opportunistic aggression in this new nuclear age. All of this is to say that the United States did not choose to create additional risks in the nuclear domain. It is our adversaries' choices that have made the world more dangerous. Recall that Russia was a partner to NATO only a decade ago. With Putin's invasion of Ukraine, Russia is again an adversary. We wanted to stay in the INF Treaty, and Russia violated it. We wanted to keep the Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty, and Russia withdrew. We want to not only adhere to New START, but to negotiate a follow-on treaty to maintain agreed-upon limits on the strategic nuclear weapons. Instead, Russia illegally and illegitimately suspended its participation in New START and shows no interest in a follow-on treaty. We've made it clear to the PRC that we're willing to have substantive risk reduction talks. The PRC has said no. We offer dialogue on denuclearization without preconditions to North Korea, and the DPRK has shown no interest. We have made sincere and good faith efforts to develop very different nuclear relationships with all our nuclear armed adversaries, but they chose a more dangerous path. And it would be irresponsible for the United States government to not confront and address this new reality, a reality foisted on us despite our best efforts to establish a different one. As a result, we have been prudently preparing for today's realities and the world we anticipate tomorrow. Since 2021, the administration has prioritized upgrading the hardware of nuclear deterrence, capabilities, posture, and operations, as well as the software, our strategic concepts, plans, and the engagements with allies on extended deterrence that make our deterrent more credible and robust. With respect to hardware, for over a year, my team and I have led a strategy-driven review of the implications of the new security environment for strategic deterrence and U.S. nuclear posture. This process is overseen by very senior levels of government and includes interagency stakeholders. We began with the principal question: what capabilities and posture do we need to credibly deter attack on the U.S. homeland, as well as our allies and vital regional interests, not just today, but tomorrow? If adjustments to our hardware and software are necessary, how do we prioritize them? How do we avoid additional risk to our existing plans and the nuclear production complex? As part of this review, we are taking a fresh look at the U.S. nuclear modernization, including examining the underlying assumptions of the modernization program, which was conceived at a time when we assumed that we would only have to deter a New START compliant Russia. Obviously, 15 years later, things have changed. Some things became clear to us early on. First, as others, including the independent and bipartisan Congressional Strategic Posture Commission, concurred, the program of record described in the 2022 NPR is necessary, but may well be insufficient to meet the deterrence challenges of the future and to mitigate risks that could arise during the transition to a modernized nuclear triad. Preserving the option to change course tomorrow requires that we make necessary decisions and investment today. We pursued the B-61 TAC-13 for additional flexibility. We're taking steps to extend the availability of current generation Ohio-class SSBNs so they can operate longer if necessary during the transition to modern systems. We are complying with congressional direction to develop and field a nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missile. Although the 2022 NPR canceled the program, because at the time the administration assessed it was unnecessary and could distract from other priorities. Today, the world is different. We are also reviewing and prioritizing other ways we might adjust U.S. posture. We have begun exploring options to increase future launcher capacity or additional deployed warheads on the land, sea, and air legs that could offer national leadership increased flexibility if executed. We also continue to seek ways to integrate non-nuclear capabilities to enable and augment strategic deterrence. But make no mistake, for the foreseeable future, nuclear weapons will provide unique deterrent effects that no other element of U.S. military power can replace. They remain the ultimate backstop to deter strategic attacks against the United States, our allies, and partners. As NSC Senior Director Pranay Vadi noted earlier this year, absent a change in the nuclear trajectories of the PRC, Russia, and North Korea, we may reach a point where a change in the size or posture of our current deployed forces is necessary. There is no need to grow the stockpile yet, but adjustments to the number of deployed capabilities may be necessary if our adversaries continue down their current paths. We seek a smart and flexible posture, not an unlimited one, but achieving it may require deploying more and or different capabilities than we feel today. Thankfully, the United States does not face this new reality alone. As both Matt and General Cotton pointed out, our network of allies and partners in the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific is an asymmetric advantage that our adversaries can never hope to match. We have made tremendous advances in the last 3 years to strengthen allied assurance and upgrade to our extended deterrence software. I was privileged to lead U.S. bilateral and multilateral efforts with all the allies to whom we formally extend nuclear deterrence. And over the past 3 years, we have worked with our NATO partners to make significant strides to make NATO nuclear deterrence not just fit for purpose, but fitter for purpose. These developments represent a major strategic shift in NATO, and we continue to assess the opportunities to further enhance the credibility and efficacy of the deterrent mission, given the new geometry of the alliance. While we have accomplished a great deal, there's more work to do. NATO must continue planning efforts for both conventional and nuclear crises, and these efforts must be integrated and coherent. We must work to sustain support in the alliance and in allied capitals for nuclear modernization, and all of this rests on vigorous American leadership. Our Indo-Pacific allies are partners in extended deterrence and not just passive beneficiaries. Our tailored dialogues with the Republic of Korea, particularly with the new Nuclear Consultative Group, which was an outgrowth of the Washington Declaration of April 2023, with Japan and Australia, have become deeper and broader, including work on conventional nuclear integration, crisis consultation, and efforts to strengthen allied understanding of U.S. nuclear deterrence posture and capabilities. It is our responsibility to see the world as it is and not as we hoped or wished it would be. It is possible that we will one day look back and see the quarter century after the Cold War as nuclear intermission. The first act was the Cold War competition between the Soviet Union and the United States. Though intense, that competition was not bereft of cooperation and arms control, even at its most fraught moments. Today's unfolding second act is one in which Russia sees nuclear saber-rattling as a way to reshape the international order, in which Russia modernizes and expands its arsenal unfettered by arms control, and in which Russia continues to design and deploy destabilizing novel systems, including in outer space. This is also a world in which the PRC is wary of substantive cooperation and continues to expand and diversify its arsenal without transparency on its doctrine and intentions. And this is a world in which North Korea continues to threaten its neighbors, our closest allies, while providing the ammunition for Russia's war in Ukraine. Intermission is over, and we are clearly in the next act. We have an obligation to continually assess our policies and capabilities and consider whether we are doing enough to protect the United States and our allies and partners. We must prepare for a world where constraints on nuclear weapons arsenals disappear entirely. Modernizing U.S. nuclear capabilities today and preparing for future posture adjustments may help incentivize our adversaries to engage in strategic arms control discussions. However, if our adversaries continue to make choices that make them and the world less safe, the United States is and should be prepared to do what is necessary to successfully compete, to deter aggression and assure our allies in this new nuclear age. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Narang, for that sobering assessment of the international security environment. And with China's massive nuclear buildup, some have started talking about a two-peer nuclear environment. But I really like the terminology you and General Cotton used. It's really a two-peer plus environment. And thanks also for that update on ongoing reviews within the Department of Defense. That mirrors a speech you gave recently at a think tank that got a lot of attention. So there's a lot to dig into there. So look forward to returning to some of those themes. Before we do, though, we'll turn to our next panelist. Again, Barry Pavel from the RAND Corporation. His full bio is in your packet, but I should mention that he was the Senior Director for Defense Policy and Strategy at the National Security Council during the Bush and Obama administrations, and in that role oversaw several strategic reviews for the Obama administration. So Barry, 5 to 8 minutes, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Matt. And we do need to talk about your internship evaluation later today. I also want to thank General Cotton. In light of the quality and quantity of this room, he has to be considered one of the world's greatest conveners. And so we're going to stay in touch with you as we look to do convenings in other areas. I'm going to be a little contrarian because I think analytic friction in this kind of time of great flux is really important. If we're all agreeing and kind of saying the same things, then I'm not sure we're going to get to the right answers. So I'll just try to make a few points, but I'll try to make them clearly. I think, our adversaries, most important, first point, our adversaries are increasingly close and increasingly ambitious. When Putin went to Moscow and there was a state dinner with Xi, he walked Xi to his car. I don't know if many of you might have seen this. There was a video. Xi was going to get in the car, and then he turns around to Putin and he says, if we work closely together, we can shape the next 100 years of global history. I mean, it's a chilling video, and I strongly recommend it. But they're working together more closely. They may be, they live and work in a cutthroat environment, so they don't share the same values, but this could be a good long run, and we're seeing indications that they're operating together, they're exercising together, they're aiding each other. We just saw the new alliance between the DPRK and Russia. What does that mean? I think we need to be really attentive to these things. And so while the Russian and Chinese experts say they're never going to be the best buddies, I do think we should be really focused on the possibility that their cooperation may exceed what we think. So that's number one. Number two, our efforts, while unity has grown across the advanced democratic economies in North America, Asia, and Europe, I don't think we're as united as we should be, and I don't think we're as ambitious as we should be. Certainly not as ambitious as our adversaries. So we're seeing a lot of incrementalism. We're seeing a lot of reliance on old tools and old approaches, some of which is necessary. We need to keep some of those arrangements and tools and policies going. But the fact that we are in a new era of history, clearly, than we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, future historians will name this era something. But the approach is, there's a lack of creative, new, bold ideas. And so in this room, in addition to government officials, there are a lot of think tank and research officials. Please, I just implore you, especially the next gen, we need fresh, creative, new ideas. We should not be sort of just always going to the same toolkit and the same approaches. There's also a lack of understanding in our community, it seems to me, of the value and importance of our own leverage and our own power. When you think about it, our adversaries' economies are weak. Xi Jinping and the economic challenges that he faces, they are enormous and structural. Our adversaries' leadership positions are fragile. They are playing weak hands very well when you step back and look at it. And when you think about the United States fundamentals and our allies' fundamentals, we really are much stronger, but sometimes, we're not even playing a weak hand. Sometimes we're not even playing. And so I just think we need to be bolder and more ambitious and up our game. So just a few thoughts on what we might think about doing, and this doesn't exhaust the universe of thoughts, but just sort of exemplary. I think we should lock in the unity across all of the allies who've been consulting systematically on Ukraine, but lock that in and make it structured, make it systematic, and really make it a set of geopolitical and defense and economic talks every so often so that we can strengthen our unity and make sure that our policies are ahead of those of our adversaries. I think we need to do much more to link American and allied strategies and planning and plans. AUKUS is a great step, and I applaud those officials who've really broken a lot of China to move it in the right direction. We need many, many more such ambitious efforts. In terms of plans, we need to plan for a large-scale Eurasian war. We are still locked into regional siloed thinking. As I said, our adversaries are not. This very well could be a global conflict, but we're still in our silos planning for Indo-PACOM war and potentially a European war, and I don't think that's going to get us where we need to go. If we are supposed to be known as worst-case scenario planning, conservative planning, we're not doing it, and we really should be moving with alacrity to do that. We do need to strengthen deterrence, and I think we want to get to a position where our adversaries are pausing and they're worried about what we might do. We need to get them on their heels and not always be the ones, we don't always want to be the ones responding to what they're doing. So it's really time, I think, to get to this particular conference. We need to increase the role of nuclear weapons in our national security strategy. I applaud everything that Vipin said, but it is too little and too slow. There's no reason we can't move more rapidly to align our policies, our strategies, and our plans with the world we're already seeing. It's not like this world is coming. It is here. And so the fact that we have not yet recognized that for whatever reason in terms of the role of nuclear weapons, I think we need to get going. And I'm optimistic that the next administration, whichever party wins, will do so. I think we need to form new alliances. We're keeping the alliances we have because we share common values, and I'm an ardent believer in these alliances, and as long as we share common values, we should keep them, we should keep adapting them. But there's a lot of new alliances we could form, not just in the military area, but in economic, technology, setting standards, et cetera. We need to start linking more the security and the economic and technology into plans and actions. For example, we know China will continue to coerce nations for actions that they don't like, that those nations took that they don't like, giving Nobel Prizes or whatever. And so we should have contingency plans on the shelf for Chinese economic coercion scenarios so that when China coerces Korea or Lithuania or the Czech Republic or what have you, we have a set of allies who will step in and fill that vacuum in terms of economic activity, in terms of trade, in terms whatever the nature of the coercion is. Again, we're in this new era. China's been doing this, but we haven't yet caught up to the new era where we're developing these new approaches. So those are just a few examples. I think I'll stop there, but this is a panel about the rules-based international order. I think a lot of it is good, but we need to get going and start developing new elements of a rules-based international order for this era. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Barry, helping to wake us up early in the morning, and a good call, I think, for us to be bold. And we are at a new era of history, as Dr. Narang said, and if you think about the creation of the rules-based international system after World War II, there was a huge burst of creativity. NATO, the Marshall Plan, the things we came up with were amazing. And so where is that burst of creativity now? And I think you gave us some of those ideas that we can discuss. Before we do that, though, we'll turn next to Marshall Billingslea. Marshall has a distinguished career at NATO, on Capitol Hill, State Department, Treasury. Maybe most importantly, though, he was recently a commissioner on the Strategic Posture Commission. So, Marshall, look forward to your thoughts.
Thank you, Matt. And it's great to be here with you and this team, and also to know that I think we've got the vast majority of all the posture commissioners are here, and there'll be a separate panel to talk about that. I'm going to give some comments that are, I think, generally consistent with the Posture Commission, but maybe go a little further into depth on one particular aspect of the threat to the international order, the U.S.-led international order that we discuss in the Posture Commission. And here I'm going to focus specifically on the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. This is, as we said in the Posture Commission, this is a cornerstone of U.S. national security, and I have serious and growing concerns about our ability to protect that regime in the coming decade. This stems from a combination of things that Russia is doing, that proliferant states are doing, and that China is doing. If I start with Russia, obviously we all understand that Russia is a serial treaty violator. And not only now are they in violation of the New START treaty, to the extent that actually questions arise as to whether that treaty is still in force, But they, as we've just heard, they're raising questions about their commitment to the Treaty on Outer Space. But if I go back to one particular thing that they violated, which causes, I think, significant potential harm to the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that is the fact that they violated the Budapest Memorandum that was signed in 1994, whereunder Ukraine joined the NPT and agreed to give up all of the nuclear weapons under its control. I believe that, generally speaking, Ukrainian leadership today, and probably the broader population, may view that decision as a catastrophic mistake. And if we listen to some of our allies on the frontier, on NATO's eastern front, we're starting to hear some alarming comments regarding concerns that maybe certain NATO allies have aspirations to possess nuclear weapons. We need to nip this in the bud. The second thing that's happened with regard to Russia is their brandishing, their saber rattling of the nuclear weapon, which has, I think, been a shock to perhaps two generations of policymakers and the general public who don't really recall Soviet behavior during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But this use of nuclear weapons in such a clear, coercive manner has certainly thrust them front and center in terms of the global population's awareness and concerns about where we stand with regard to the desired path towards eventual nuclear disarmament. Thirdly, Russian losses in Ukraine are definitely driving Russia to an even greater dependence on its nuclear arsenal, which is, as has been said, as the Commission said, is expanding. It's expanding particularly in the shorter range nuclear systems, battlefield type systems. Russia's losing, according to UK Defense Intelligence, at least 1,000 casualties a day since March. More than 500,000 total casualties so far. By my calculations, that means that by the end of the third year of war, Russia will have suffered casualties amounting to about 3% of its male population between the ages of 15 and 39. They've spent $211 billion in direct expenses on their war effort, making them incredibly financially and economically dependent now on the People's Republic of China. But their system losses, now you have to take what the Ukrainians say with a huge grain of salt, but the Ukrainians claim to have eliminated about 8,000 tanks. They claim to have eliminated about 16,000 artillery, and even if this is only overstated by an order of two, Russia is now fielding antiquated and mothballed weapon systems into Ukraine, and we see this very, very clearly. That in turn has driven a Russian dependency on North Korea and Iran for a wide range of weapon systems. Artillery shells, that General Cotton mentioned a number of elements of that. With regard to Iran, of course, we see not only the drones, but now there are mounting concerns about ballistic missile, the furnishing of ballistic missile systems. We are now seeing that Russia appears willing to undermine key aspects of the NPT because of their dependence on these proliferant nations. The first very clear indication, or an early very clear indication, was Russia's decision to veto extension of the UN panel of experts for North Korea, which was established by the UN Security Council in furtherance of the sanctions imposed on North Korea for its violations of the NPT. But Russia just vetoed continuation of that capability. So what's going to happen if when North Korea conducts its next nuclear test? Is Russia simply going to shut down the Security Council and any prospect for addressing that through the mechanisms that we have there? Likewise, when you look at Iran, Iran is now beyond the threshold of a nuclear capability, right? We've all followed the massive expansion in their enrichment capabilities, but we've seen now that the Director of National Intelligence has, for the first time since 2019, refused to assure Congress that Iran is not conducting nuclear weapons-related activities. That is a significant tell from our intelligence community regarding where Iran now stands with regard to the possible production and testing of a nuclear device. Now, if Iran, who is clearly supporting Russia with a wide range of indispensable capabilities on the battlefield of Ukraine, if Iran chooses to conduct that nuclear test, how will Russia respond in the Security Council and elsewhere? Will they again preclude meaningful diplomatic response? Because should they do that, the damage to the NPT will be significant and lasting. Finally, if I turn to China, as we've discussed, the Posture Commission assesses that the Communist Chinese will possess by 2035, this is an important word that often gets dropped out, at least 1,500 weapons. At least 1,500. They have more silos today than we do. What China is doing is unprecedented in the atomic era. We have not, since the Manhattan Project and the dawn of the atomic era, been faced with the prospects of a three-way nuclear arms race. And there are significant concerns about the fact that the Chinese are refusing to honor their obligations under the NPT, under Article 6 of the NPT, which obligates them not to agree to any particular thing or outcome. We're not obligated either. But it does obligate the Communist Chinese to negotiate in good faith, and they are refusing to do so. So if I turn then to, in this environment, what do we need to do given all of these worrisome trends? I think first and foremost, the word is reassurance. We've got to reassure our allies. We've got to make them believe that our extended deterrent remains valid, remains unquestioned. Now that means shelving this irresponsible rhetoric regarding no first use, which I think we've finally gotten beyond. But it also makes sure that it also means making sure that we have the capabilities that are necessary to underpin that extended deterrent. And here, as the Posture Commission recommended, it does mean looking at basing or deploying theater nuclear weapons in Asia. I believe this is vital given the concerns that our South Korean allies in particular have, and in recently concerning rhetoric coming out of South Korea regarding its desire for a residual nuclear capability of its own. It also probably means ultimately additional theater weapons in Europe, and it probably means new warhead storage areas that are in Eastern Europe to confront this rising Russian threat. I believe it means urgently looking for a way to bring Ukraine into both the EU and NATO to forestall any potential Ukrainian interest post-hostilities in a nuclear capability. And also to give some level of confidence and comfort to our Baltic allies, to the Poles and the Romanians, who I think are very, very, very attuned to Ukrainian thinking on this topic. It means resumption of an aggressive diplomatic pressure campaign against China to embarrass them and to pressure them to honor their Article 6 obligations and to come to the negotiating table. That probably also requires the deployment of additional capabilities that are of great concern to the Communist Chinese in the Asia-Pacific theater. It probably will ultimately mean that we will need to look beyond SLICM-in at additional types of theater nuclear capabilities and deployment options both in Europe and Asia. And then finally, it requires that we have a very forceful response to Iran in the event that they should make the very ill-considered decision to engage in fielding a nuclear weapon. Thank you, Matt.
Great. Thanks very much, Marshall, and for those insightful comments. Reminds me of how much I learned from you and the other commissioners on the commission. And I think appropriate for a panel on international institutions and law and norms to focus on nonproliferation, the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty, often considered the most successful treaty in history, and also good to focus on extended deterrence. We sometimes forget, but the United States is unique in that we use our nuclear weapons not just to protect ourselves, but essentially to protect the entire free world. 30+ formal treaty allies, 60% of global GDP protected by U.S. nuclear weapons. Batting cleanup, we're very fortunate to have Mallory Stewart. Again, her full bio is in the packet, but she's worked at Sandia National Laboratories at the White House, and she's currently, a new title in this role, she's currently the Assistant Secretary for Arms Control, Deterrence, and Stability. So, Mallory, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to General Cotton and the whole team here for a really excellent opportunity to discuss these really important issues. I'm honored to be part of this panel. I wanted to sort of track back a bit to some of the original questions, Matt, that you asked and really focus on what we mean when we talk about the rules-based international order. Because there's a lot of, I think, mis and disinformation out there about what the U.S. government and our allies and partners are talking about when we say we need to support this. I think there's been a trend for Russia and others to accuse the U.S. government of supporting only those rules that sort of advantage us, only those principles and norms that give us an edge. And I need to correct that absolutely and say what we're talking about is international law freely agreed upon, decided, and built with both Russia and China and the vast majority of the international community. So when we talk about those rules and norms that keep us safe, that provide us those decades of security, that have established economic power and humanitarian successes, we're talking about an institution of laws and norms that every country participated in the creation of and really has valued in many ways for many, many years. And I think that's an important point because the argument that somehow we pick and choose is not accurate, and we should make clear that's not what we're doing. We are valuing international law and norms that provide predictability, they provide stability, they provide national security, they allow us to cooperate and coordinate in a way that enhances our transparency and our capacity to prevent misunderstanding and miscalculation and unintentional escalation. So the rules-based international order that we're talking about is really fundamentally the risk reduction that we all strive for in preventing the outbreak of hostilities, unintentional escalation, and of course, miscalculation that leads to these conflicts. So, that's what we strive to appreciate with our partners and allies. We strive to work together to enforce. But we need to figure out in a way that is coherent and compelling, just as Barry mentioned, in creative new ways, how we remind Russia specifically, as it continues its illegal violation of sovereignty, that the rules-based international order is in its own interest. Just as the U.S. and our allies value sort of the poster child for international law and norms of responsible behavior, we value arms control and risk reduction. We need to remind Russia and China and all of those governments that may have walked away from appreciating the value of international law and norms. We need to remind it why it's in their own interest. Working towards attribution and accountability for those violations of international law, to remind countries why we need to adhere to these standards and norms, and demonstrate there will be no advantage whatsoever from violating the system that we've put in place collectively for decades, since the end of World War II. And I think that's something that we need to focus on more specifically in our outreach and our work with our most important and, as General Kant said, asymmetric advantage with our allies and partners, to remind those governments that don't take the international law and norms system as seriously as they should, that it's in their own interest. So I like to call it a team sport, working towards the rules-based international order. I worry that that'll be used against the U.S. government again as suggesting it's an us versus them approach. It's not. Everyone should join this team. It should be all of us working together to say this is in our interest. Just as we adhere to the NPT, we strengthen, the CWC, the Chemical Weapons Convention, the BWC. We strengthen all of the international laws and norms that we have helped collectively put in place. We need those countries to value it as well. And so I think what we're trying to work towards is to make sure that each country can maximize their advantages from that system. And that's not exclusive to any country. If you adhere to the international legal system, adhere to the norms of responsible behaviors across the board, something that I think this community especially values and appreciates, then we all will have greater success and security. And it's really shocking to me that in the past few years, as we've seen the devolution of some of these treaties and norms, and especially the violation of the UN Charter that Russia continues to pursue upon Ukraine, we've seen a lessening of the appreciation for the security that this system has provided to the international community for decades. And I think that's something that we should talk about, we should think about creatively, we should show no benefit from those violations, and we should maximize the conversation with why it's so important to pursue risk reduction, pursue international law, strengthen it, value it, and really create new norms of responsible behavior in those gray zones that we see, I think, exacerbated or in some way utilized by nefarious players. We should figure out how we show what responsible behavior is there so that we can correctly categorize irresponsible behavior and try to work collectively to prevent it, deter it, and hopefully accomplish a more stable and sustainable international security environment. So just a few opening comments, but I appreciate the conversations and all of the comments that have gone before.
Well, those are great comments, Mallory. And when we think about the rules-based system, it's not just that Russia, China, Iran, North Korea are doing things that are threatening, but they're violating agreements that they've signed up to, that the rest of the civilized world adheres to. And so it underscores the important work that you're doing at the State Department, pursuing negotiations with these countries and showing to the rest of the world that we're trying, and it's the adversaries that really don't seem interested at the moment. So I had planned to now ask a few questions of my own, but there are a ton of questions pouring in already. So I think I'll turn directly to the audience questions. And we have several questions about new technology, so artificial intelligence, quantum computing, cyber, space, questions about how this affects deterrence, and also about how this affects arms control. So maybe I'll direct the first question at Dr. Narang. How did you think about emerging technology and U.S. strategic posture? Then we'll turn to Mallory to discuss how this affects arms control, and then would love to get comments from Barry and Marshall as well. And Vipin, maybe to put a fine point on it, I sometimes have students say, well, who cares about nuclear weapons, and isn't the future all cyber and AI? And so how would you answer that question? And again, how do you think about emerging technology affecting strategic posture?
It's a great question, Matt. And we thought a lot about this. The original theory of our office, and we have some of my former leadership, I think, at the symposium. The theory of the case was sort of the Office of Strategic Capabilities. I think, it was ASD for space policy. But nuclear and countering weapons of mass destruction and cyber policy were originally included in the establishment of the ASD. And so we had all of those offices to begin with. I think over time I have become a real believer in the statement that the department makes, that General Cotton has made, that the Secretary has made, that the ultimate backstop of strategic deterrence is nuclear weapons. There's no substitute for nuclear weapons. And so I view space and cyber capabilities as potential enhancements, enablers, augmenters of strategic deterrence, but not as a substitute. There's really no technology on the horizon that would substitute for the certainty and the destructive power of nuclear weapons, and then the strategic deterrent effect that they may have to deter adversaries and assure allies. And so, space is obviously critically important to the nuclear deterrent as an enabler, an augmenter, and a supporting function, NC3 obviously being the most obvious example. But in terms of cyber capabilities, cyber capabilities can help enhance strategic capabilities, but they wouldn't be a substitute. I can't envision a cyber capability having the certainty and the destructive effect of nuclear weapons that would induce the same kind of, uncertainty in the adversary that they could achieve their objectives without punishment or consequence. And so that's sort of how we thought about it. And I think we need to do more to invest and leverage how we think about those non-nuclear capabilities for strategic deterrence in terms of enhancements and enablers. But I'm firmly of the view that there's no substitute.
Great, thanks, Dr. Narang. Mallory, what about for arms control?
Yeah, thank you. It's such an important question in the emerging technologies arena, in space, in cyber, and AI. We see our capabilities and capacities outpacing the existing legal structures, if any, that are in place to address what responsible behavior is. And I think in the arms control space, we've been trying to work with our allies and partners to collectively figure out and define what that responsible behavior looks like so that the emerging technologies arena can't, again, be exploited, something that I mentioned before, exploited as a gray zone where you can't tell where destabilizing behavior is occurring or irresponsible actors are operating and maximizing their capacity. So if we can help define what responsible behavior is, and I think working closely with Vipin's team and others in the Department of Defense, we've been able to work on the political declaration on the responsible use of AI in the military, reflecting 10 principles that our military has long actually valued, NATO values as well, to ensure the use of AI is done in a manner consistent with international law, in a manner that recognizes inherent human biases, in a manner that values the training and understanding of the operators of that AI, so you don't have AI systems upon AI systems adding risks and unintentional sort of challenges into the system. We have this document that we're working on now with over 55 countries and growing to sort of help us figure out where responsible behavior lies, to use norms and values of the international system to try to prevent destabilizing effects from this emerging technology. And we think, from the arms control perspective, approaching these conversations in the institutions that exist, the open-ended working groups over in Geneva, the Conference on Disarmament, the first committee where we've also engaged in risk reduction efforts with our prohibition on destructive direct descent ASAT, so anti-satellite weapons that create debris. We've demonstrated that there are concepts and principles of what is responsible behavior to the vast majority of the international community. Our ASAT prohibition in the first committee was agreed upon by 155 countries, and that's growing, and we have already more than 37 countries that have committed, at the national level to not conduct this destabilizing behavior following the US government's lead. So we're working in the arms control context to define the gray zones, define those arenas in which emerging technology is rapidly expanding beyond our existing rules-based international order to help figure out how we do that development and that necessary progress in emerging technologies, which can lead to so much good in a way that's responsible and not destabilizing, and hopefully in a risk reduction way.
A lot of activity going on there that many people may not be aware of. So good that you were willing to share that. And then one of the things we noted in the commission is that new technology also has a role to play potentially in verification of future arms control agreements, something I think you and your team are probably thinking a lot about. Barry, new technology and strategic forces?
Sure. I mean, I think this question about AI is not just a good question, it might be the question of our age. When people like Henry Kissinger are saying that this could mean the end of the Enlightenment, where humans don't understand scientific advances but machines do, then that caused me to sit up and take notice. I think there's some things we know and some things we don't know yet, but it is worth a lot of time and energy and research, and certainly at RAND we're devoting a large amount of effort to questions surrounding AI and geopolitics and military operations. I think a couple of things we do know are that there's a good chance that AI could fuel cyber operations that are more capable and impactful than the current approaches. And we know that AI, and there's a number of publications on this already, can also strengthen disinformation operations at scale, which in the middle of a crisis or in the middle of a conflict involving nuclear adversaries, that could be extraordinarily significant, and I think is sometimes undervalued in our community. But there's a lot that we don't know yet, and so I think we should be looking at this set of questions very hard and trying to understand what it might portend for the future of strategic stability and nuclear and nuclear deterrence. There are a lot of other technologies that also could sort of upend the triad as we know it in the long term. And I think we should be preparing for that and thinking hard about that and doing as much S&T as we can to better understand that. And if and when that time comes, and again, we're spending some time on this at RAND, I think that involves a lot of complexity in terms of transitions and how do we think about it ourselves, how do we think about it with allies, and how do we decide the nature, timing, and content of a dialogue with China, Russia, and others. So really epical questions that could be coming up, and I think we should be really thinking hard about those now, so I really applaud the question.
Marshall.
I hope this question also gets asked to the, the panel on the Posture Commission, because Dr. Gloria Duffy in particular was very, very focused on the emerging technologies and the relevance to our strategic posture. I applaud Mallory and her colleagues at the State Department for the 10 principles on AI. I thought they were very, very sound. Generally speaking, in my view, as I read it, it establishes the principle that there should be a human in the loop in all of these activities. And I think that's exactly the right way to approach it. That said, let's not kid ourselves. We are going to be adopting AI in every aspect of our lives, and this command today is going to be and is involved in adoption of certain things that very strongly resemble AI. So I think at the end of the day, with respect to that capability, the issue is not so much limiting it or trying to control it as establishing norms and as ensuring that we are the dominant actor on the field. I do want to speak very, very quickly about one thing that you will find referenced in the Posture Commission that Rose Gottmuller and I agreed to, the whole commission agreed to, but that is the importance of further investment in verification technologies. Many, many years ago, I was the lead staffer who drafted the laws to fold the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency into the Department of State and create 2 assistant secretaries, one for arms control and one for verification. When we did that, we also established something which still exists called the V Fund, the Verification Fund. That fund has been anemically supported and resourced by both Republican and Democratic administrations. And I think it's really, really crucial that we put additional resources into the exploration of verification technologies that will be needed in the event that someday arms control once again becomes feasible. During the Trump administration, I was the president's envoy, we adopted the view that the only way to effectively get at both the Chinese expansion and the Russian, what they call non-strategic nuclear weapons, these tactical theater weapons, because we're not going to allow Russians to climb all over our warhead storage areas, we're not going to allow them onto our submarines in the future with slick them in. They're similarly not going to, and it's probably infeasible to try to account at the deployed level for all their torpedoes and landmines and Icecanders. The way to get at this is almost back to the future through the portal monitoring approach that we took on the INF Treaty. The problem is that we today don't have the suite of procedures and technologies that we would find acceptable to employ under a regime that tried to limit total warhead count. So this is an area where we need to get the scientific community, we need to get the weapons laboratories moving in a direction through proper application of resources.
Great. Thanks, Marshall. So Barry, your call to be bold has generated a lot of questions here. So I'm kind of going to group 3 together, and we'll start with you, but then I'd invite the others to join as well. So first question, and this could be read as a rhetorical question, but I think there's a serious question in there. If we face a multi-adversary future, then why does our current military strategy only plan to deal with one at a time? First. Second, let's see here. I just lost it. Yes. So you said we should be bold and we should go faster. But is there a trade-off there, especially as we're thinking about future posture and weapons choices? And I think the implication is, if we want to go fast, maybe relying on stuff that we have already. If we want to be bold, that's going to take longer. And then finally, how do we pay for all this? So start first with Barry and then go to the others.
I think there's another panel on paying for all this, so we can defer that question to them. I mean, on the question of one at a time is the current defense strategy, I just don't think that's, I don't even think when the strategy was developed that it was a realistic, approach to sizing and shaping our forces. I mean, we don't, and then one would come back and say, well, we don't have enough. Well, then what do we do about that? We have national conversation, we include allies more, we look at new concepts of operation. I mean, this isn't, these aren't insoluble problems, even if they are challenging. But I don't think it's realistic to say, well, we only will have the capability to deal with one conflict, one adversary at a time, even though if that is the nature of the resources that we currently have, then we need to get more resources. And then we need to make harder decisions and bolder decisions in other areas in terms of what do we not need to keep doing. And so there's just really not enough of that, and I know there's congressional politics at play, so I'm not being kind of naive, but I do think that that's a place for boldness in all the areas that I just suggested. I don't think it's a choice between bolder and faster, because certainly our adversaries are being bold and fast. I mean, sure, democracies are messy, and we need to negotiate, and we work more closely with allies, and that takes time, and I'm a huge advocate for the criticality of allies, and I want to bring allies more into our efforts. But this strange emphasis on process as the answer, to me, in areas like global posture changes and in other areas, I mean, just having lots of meetings on topics but not moving the ball, to me, I'm sounding a little critical, you know, to me is not really the answer. So I do think you can be bolder and faster if you can focus on the real priorities and, again, drop other processes and you know, you can't do it all. So what are the lower priority things that you'll keep on boil and let others do or not get them done at all? And what do you really want to focus on? If you're in a leadership position for a certain tenure, you always think, and I've learned this from many of you, some of my mentors here in the audience, you know, what are your 3 to 5 big wins going to be in your 3-year tenure, your 4-year tenure? Focus on those 3 to 5 things. Doesn't mean other things won't continue, but where are you really going to move the ball? And so to me, that's kind of the answer to that question. And then in terms of paying for it, again, you need to make really hard choices. In terms of programs that should not continue, they're all going to be valuable, but what is most valuable and what is less valuable? So if you're not making major decisions and someone is very unhappy when you leave the table, then you're not doing it right.
Others like to come in on this? Marshall, I see you reaching for your microphone. Please go ahead.
Yeah. I think, you know, I was at NATO when we first adopted the 2% spending target many, many years ago, not recently, back in 2007 or 6 or 8. It is regrettable that so many of our NATO allies have so chronically been derelict and have been free riders on the back of the United States and a handful of other allies. That situation is now beginning to remedy itself, with, I think, all but 8 allies now close to or achieving the 2% spending target. But in many cases, like Germany, we have decades of underinvestment that have to be addressed and caught up. And 2% itself is, I think, inadequate. We need to begin a discussion with our allies. It is unacceptable for our NATO allies to allow us to go Winchester in our inventories over Ukraine when they should have been investing all along in their capabilities and their industrial base. So we do need NATO to step up, and we do need to find ways to put enormous pressure on the 8 remaining underperformers, but we need to begin pushing towards a 3% goal for all of the allies. I also believe if you go back and you look at how much the U.S. was spending percentage of GDP during the Cold War, we were well north of 5%. So maybe we don't need to get to 5%, but you know, I think, as was said, we do need a national discussion because we are underinvesting in both the conventional and the nuclear capabilities that we need, given the fact that we are facing, I think, an imminent threat of either opportunistic or coordinated simultaneous aggression against us and our allies.
Thanks, Marshall. Just a quick comment on that, if I could. On the 2%, I was talking to a senior European defense official recently who said they've done, his country did their own kind of internal assessment, and their assessment is to actually provide the capabilities called for in the new regional plans, that something like an average of 3.6% defense spending across the alliance is what's going to be needed. But I see Mallory here eager to jump in, so Mallory, please.
Thank you, and I'm sure Vipin will want to comment as well, but just to say, I kind of disagree with the question that we are only addressing one threat at a time. In fact, I feel like everything we're doing to strengthen our extended deterrence alliances, to address the comprehensive threat that we face, not just from nuclear near peers potentially, but from all of the challenges in the strategic environment, from weapon systems and gray zones. We're trying really to address the threats across the board, all at the same time, right? Which is challenging. And I think the way policy documents are written, we constantly have to look for updates. As Vipin was mentioning, we are in the process of figuring out how to even update from something that was, recently discussed in the beginning of this administration. I think there's a constant effort to address everything and to do it as efficiently as possible. But of course, it's challenging, and that makes it hard to focus on everything. And so while we don't often talk about the threats that we're addressing in the chem bio arena or the threats that we're addressing across the board in some of the other extraordinarily important arenas with bad actors and bad players, we are doing that. It's just in this conversation, we often focus on the two nuclear near peers. So I would sort of disagree with that question, but say yes, and we have to do more of that multitasking. With respect to the bold ideas being slower, I think that's on us, and I disagree that has to be the case. I think, what Barry's talking about, what we've heard for a long period of time, what we're trying to push for in this administration is to think creatively, to do new and different approaches to things that we've been trying in the same way for years, right? To stop butting our heads against walls that are not crumbling, but to think creatively of how we climb over them or get around them or disintegrate those walls in different ways. And I think that doesn't have to be slow as long as the approach is to figure out the objective of national security, of international security for our partners and allies, figuring out how to support, again, the rules-based international order and not fear something that hasn't been done before just because it hasn't been done before. So I don't think it has to be a boldness versus timing dichotomy. But I do think there are ways to use the toolkits, the broader toolkits of national security, such as norms, such as international law, such as the arms control, transparency, and confidence building measures to try to eliminate unnecessary programs that we have already decided are not in our interest, to eliminate paying money for things that does not benefit us, right? We know we need nuclear deterrence. We know we need to have a strong, effective, credible ability to deter our adversaries. And I think that is something we should not ever take resources from. But we do know, we've decided long ago, we don't need certain weapons and systems. Things that we decided long ago were not in our interest. It's not in our interest to intentionally create debris in outer space. It's not in our interest, not in any government's interest, to place a nuclear weapon in outer space. These are concepts that we decided upon, and we don't have to spend money on sort of evaluating them. We don't have to spend money on arms racing when we've decided long ago these are not in our interest. And I think that's an important point to make as well.
Vipin, I'm sure you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I agree with Mallory. And, we ask more of our nuclear force than any other country. So the United States, because of its extended deterrence commitments, which are, I think, one of our greatest nonproliferation tools in our toolkit, are charged with, sort of non-contiguous assurance and defense against strategic attack against our allies. It's 30 plus formal allies to whom we extend deterrence. And that poses challenges in this new security environment that we have not previously faced because of the risk of simultaneous or sequential conflicts in different theaters. And so, the questions are kind of coupled. I think, we don't want to have to rely on a massive conventional force to deter conflicts in multiple theaters. We are going to rely and ask more of our nuclear force in this new security environment if we are in a conflict in one theater to deter regional aggression or opportunistic aggression in another theater. And we do need to go bolder and faster, but not in the way that I think that most people think about it. Bolder and faster doesn't mean just more nuclear weapons. We don't need to outpace our adversaries or have the combined nuclear forces of our adversaries to deter them effectively. And so I think part of the process that we have undertaken, and we need help from the next generation, the thinkers in the room and the auditorium there. How do we develop a smarter posture? What are the precise capabilities we need to deter regional aggression in the Indo-Pacific, which are different than the capabilities you may need in Europe? in a lot of ways, if all we had to do was deter strategic attack against the homeland, I think the strategic posture that that would be required would be very simple to outline, and that's essentially what our adversaries have to think about. But the extended deterrence commitments that we have, that we take in the Biden administration, or took it in the Biden administration as a solemn obligation, because it is in our interest to extend deterrence to these allies. We don't do it out of altruism; it's in our interest as well. Requires thinking very carefully about the types of forces, as well as the numbers. And the bolder, faster argument. I'm sympathetic to it, but we also have a nuclear enterprise that was sized for a post-Cold War, that is sized for a post-Cold War era. And so we can't break the NNSA and have to work hand in glove with them to be able to deliver the capabilities that are absolutely necessary. And this is where we arrived at, along with the Strategic Posture Commission. The program of record is absolutely necessary. And we're approaching the realization that it may well be insufficient for the future, but we need to hit the program of record. And so we can't add additional stress on NSA or the Department of Energy, which is a real constraint that threatens the necessity of the program of record too. So we have to think carefully about those trade-offs as we go through this process. And I think it's really important that choices we make don't cause everything to slip right. So it's important that we think about these trade-offs very carefully, and that's where sort of the line about thinking about what a smarter posture is, how we sequence these things, is really important. And so, the challenge I think we face collectively, and it's an all-hands-on-deck challenge, is how do we develop, sort of, and think about the right choices to make, a smarter posture and not just a bigger posture. Over.
Right. We only have 5 minutes left, so we'll do a final lightning round. So I'd ask each speaker a minute or less if you have any closing comments you'd like to make. And I will put one final question on the table, which I think is a good one. This is a panel about norms. One of the questions says, essentially, are norms a disadvantage, that we do think of nuclear weapons as kind of taboo, as maybe inappropriate, whereas our adversaries don't have the same restrictions. They're threatening and maybe even willing to use nuclear weapons. Is that a handicap? So Marshall, maybe we'll start first with you on this one. 1 minute on that question, or anything you want to leave the audience with.
Yeah, so as long as the norms are the ones that we and our allies have very carefully shaped for the past many decades, then they're absolutely in our interest. But remember that when we talk about how the international order that we've founded is under threat from these dictatorial regimes, they want a rules-based order, but they want their own rules. And so when you look at Chinese behavior in the South China Sea, constructing islands, impeding freedom of navigation, those are norms they're trying to create that we absolutely should reject.
Barry.
Yeah, I agree with everything Marshall just said, and in terms of nuclear norms, I do fully agree that those are in our interest, that there should be a taboo. But as I said in my initial remarks, they give us some leverage. We should not use that leverage wantonly, but when appropriate, and I think there has been a couple of appropriate instances over the last 2 to 3 years when we should have sort of stood our ground, but we did not do so. I think we're in an era now where autocratic leaders are pushing very hard, and it's spreading. So what is the best response to that? I think it's to get more united with our allies and to start pushing back together and to start making it clear that they cannot just commit aggression or coercion anywhere and any place that they like. It's a little bit of an overstatement, but it's not too much of an overstatement. And I think over the last 10 years, they have become more aggressive because they have had the sense that we will not push back in certain areas. And so they're doing the pushing. I think we need to start doing the pushing ourselves, but with respecting the norms that you referenced.
Mallory?
Yeah, I think we should be clear that norms are not just a small group of countries' decision-making, right? I think norms they have to reflect the vast majority of the world's approach, right? That's the way they become normative. And I think, while there's a recognition that certain norms may, to a limited degree, prevent freedom of operation, those norms come about because collective majority has decided the behavior at issue is risky, is challenging, and I think all of us would acknowledge that there is a risk in nuclear escalation. There's a risk in the use of the most powerful weapons we have, and so having a norm that prevents us from lightly or being completely free in the utilization of challenging weapons and potentially free in behaviors. Without that norm, we wouldn't be able to convey the importance and responsible actor that we are in trying to maintain stability and security with these challenging weapons. So, I understand that there is a normative debate internally. Certainly, when we talked about this ASAT prohibition in the first committee, there's an idea that we're restraining ourselves, but these norms come about because for many, many years we've acknowledged the intentional creation of debris is destabilizing. We've acknowledged the challenge and responsibility of having nuclear weapons requires this deep appreciation for the risks and the nuclear risks entailed. And so norms reflect the majority's approach to destabilizing behavior that we need to try to avoid as much as possible, lightly engaging in activity that can lead to greater risks.
Right. Vipin, 1 minute or less.
Sure. So I want to go back to the original point I had made, which is, we wanted a different world. And in this administration, we did everything possible, I believe, to induce our adversaries and convince our adversaries that the path they were going down was dangerous for them and the world. And it just kept getting worse and worse. I mean, we're closing with Russia thinking about putting a nuclear weapon in space. Talk about a norm that we just assumed would have been abided by because it was in everyone's interest. And in the most Soviet Russian way possible, they're pursuing an anti-satellite capability that wipe out an entire orbit with a nuclear weapon. And so we're in a different world right now. And I think, the call right now, and I think the importance of Deterrence Symposium is getting everybody who can help and think about these problems in this unprecedented security environment, to contribute to help us think about how to address these challenges simultaneously, sequentially, and I would be remiss if in the 2.5 years I spent in the position of the Pentagon in ASD space policy, we worked very hard to try and make smart choices under difficult circumstances, given the deteriorating security environment, given that we wanted the world to look very different, but it doesn't, and that's the reality we live in. And thanks to all of the components across DoD, Joint Staff, and STRATCOM, the services, Nuclear Matters, and OSD Policy, our allies, the NSC, the State Department, and NNSA, we have made progress, but we need to continue to think about how to make our posture not just fit for purpose in this new environment, but fitter for purpose. And the team has been sending me messages to wear the hat. So my last ask and call is everyone should think about how we can make our posture fitter for purpose. I lost a bet to Drew Walter, so he made me, I have to wear the hat. So, but it is a nice reminder that this is all hands on deck. And I want to thank everybody for their time and their support, and everybody for their help, my whole team out there for their support over the last couple of years.
Great.
Over.
Well, I think this panel's been fitter for purpose. You've painted a pretty dangerous security environment, but you've also given us some bold ideas about how we revitalize the order for another 80 years, let's hope, of peace, prosperity, and freedom. Please join me in thanking our distinguished panel. And with that, we're out of time, and back to the MC.